So let's take a look at Anselm's argument for the existence of God. This is usually referred to as the ontological argument. And darned if I know why, really. That's just how it's referred to. Ontological means having to do with being, so I guess my speculation is that it's called the ontological argument because the argument takes the form of starting with a thought or a conception or an idea. Anselm argues that if one has a certain idea of a thing, that is, if it exists in the mind, then because of certain unique properties of that particular idea, that thing that's being conceived in the mind must also exist in reality or have being that is independent of the mind. So that's my guess, is that that we are arguing from idea to being somehow, and that's why it's called the ontological argument. But don't quote me on that. Why don't you Google it? I did, and I didn't find out anything. I've always just called it Anselm's argument. But let's take a look at it. There is no argument in philosophy that demands greater attention to the actual wording of the argument than Anselm's ontological argument. It's key. So we have to look very closely at the text, and then you have to really think about it. So I've just given you chapters 2 through 4 of Anselm's Proslogion. Let's look at chapter 2, which is entitled, Truly There Is a God, Although the Fool Has Said in His Heart There Is No God. And so, Lord, do you, who do give understanding to faith, remember, he is a man of faith. He starts with faith in God and then attempts to prove God's existence through reason. So I think that's important. Lord, do you, who do give understanding to faith, give me, so far as you knowest it to be profitable, to understand you are as we believe. That is, he starts with belief, but he wants understanding too. And that you are that which we believe. And indeed, we believe that you are a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. That's key. That is, that what we start with is the notion of a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. Or is there no such nature, since the fool has said in his heart, there is no God? And that's a reference to one of the Psalms. But at any rate, this very fool, when he hears of this being of which I speak, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, understands what he hears. And what he understands is in his understanding, although he does not understand it to exist. So, although Anselm begins as a believer, someone who has faith in God and believes that God exists through faith, he says, well, I believe it to be a being, or I believe God to be a being than which nothing greater can be conceived. And even an atheist, someone who does not believe in God, can also conceive of such a thing. That is, when Anselm says that to somebody who doesn't believe in God, a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, even the fool or the atheist understands that concept, has that concept in his intellect, in his understanding, in his mind. He continues, for it is one thing for an object to be in the understanding, that is, to be an object of thought, to be something that somehow is contained in the understanding, and another to understand that the object exists. So we can conceive of something and have it in our understanding, but that is distinct from that thing that we are thinking of or have in our understanding actually having an independent existence. When a painter first conceives of what he will afterwards perform, he has it in his understanding, but he does not yet understand it to be, because he has not yet performed it. I guess the idea that painter can have an idea of what he or she is going to paint, and at that point, before it's painted, that painting exists in the understanding, and then when they actually paint it, it exists both in the understanding and in reality too. But after he has made the painting, he both has it in his understanding and he understands that it exists because he has made it. Okay. Hence, even the fool is convinced that something exists in the understanding, at least, than which nothing greater can be conceived. That is, we can conceive of a being greater than which no other being can be conceived. Then that exists in our understanding. That's what Anselm is trying trying to establish here at this point. For when he hears of this, he understands it, and whatever is understood exists in the understanding. Okay, so at this point in the argument, Anselm has tried to establish that we all can conceive of, and again, we have to be very careful about wording, we can all conceive of a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, and that when we do so, that exists in our understanding. And whatever is understood exists in the understanding. And here's the key move, right? And assuredly that than which nothing greater can be conceived cannot exist in the understanding alone. For, suppose it exists in the understanding alone, then it can be conceived to exist in reality, which is greater. Therefore, if that, than which nothing greater can be conceived, exists in the understanding alone, the very being than which nothing greater can be conceived is one than which a greater can be conceived. And this is where things start to get complicated. But obviously this is impossible, hence there is no doubt that there exists a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, and it exists both in the understanding and reality. The key move there is when Anselm says, and assuredly that than which nothing greater can be conceived cannot exist in the understanding alone. That's the move from saying, well, there's an idea that we can all have, irrespective of our individual beliefs. And if we have this idea of a being than which nothing greater can be conceived, then it must also exist in reality. I think what he's relying on is something along these lines. We conceive of a being greater than which no other being can be conceived. Now let's say that that being exists only in the understanding, only in our minds, and not in reality. Okay. Could we not also conceive of a being greater than which no other being can be conceived, which also exists in reality, not just in our understanding? Well, yes, we can. So if that being, second conception, exists both in the mind and in reality, independent of the mind, then that is greater than our original conception, which was of a being greater than which no other being can be conceived, but exists only in the understanding. Because something that exists is superior, exists outside of the understanding in reality, would be superior to something which only existed in the mind. What that would mean was that our original conception of a being greater than which no other can be conceived was also a being greater than which another can be conceived. That is, it would violate the principle of non-contradiction, that something can't both be and not be something at the same time in the same respect. So if we can conceive of a being greater than which nothing else can be conceived, we must concede, we must admit then that it also exists in reality, according to Anselm.